He was just my stepson. Until he stopped at my door, looked me in the eyes, and said goodnight like it meant goodbye to everything that was safe. My name is Elaine. I'm 49 years old, and I used to think I knew what it meant to live quietly, to live correctly. I married my second husband, Charles, 7 years ago, and with him came his son, from a woman I never had to know. Her name was just a file in his past. Nothing more. We had him part-time, holidays, long weekends, sticky summers filled with board games and sunscreen. It worked, mostly. A calendar life, stitched together with civility. Michael was always good, polite, the kind of boy you didn't have to worry about. Reserved. He said thank you, cleaned his plate, kept his voice even. I remember the first summer he stayed with us. He was 17, tall for his age, already quiet in that way that made you think he was older. Or maybe just further away. We never fought. But we never really talked either. Not beyond the necessary. That made it easy to keep things clean. No complicated affections. No tug-of-war between households. I wasn't his mother. I didn't try to be. I was just the woman who made the guest room comfortable and added his favorite cereal to the grocery list before his visits. But that week something in his eyes had changed. He arrived on a Thursday. Said he needed a break between jobs. Charles welcomed him, of course. He'd always been proud of the way their relationship had evolved. Less like a father and son, more like two adults who knew how to coexist with a kind of cordial distance. Michael brought one bag. Just the essentials. His room hadn't changed much. Same bedspread, same desk, same creaky blinds. When I asked if he wanted anything different, he shook his head. It's fine, he said. I just needed to breathe somewhere else for a bit. That should have been all it was. On the second night, Charles went to bed early. His usual headache. Tension, or so he claimed. I stayed up to tidy. The kind of mindless, compulsive cleaning you do when the day has been too quiet. I was rinsing a glass when I heard the floor creak. I thought it was the dog at first, but when I turned, he was already there, leaning on the doorway, one shoulder resting on the frame, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything, just watched. The kitchen light buzzed softly. The fridge hummed. I could hear the slow drip from the faucet. But in that second, everything else fell away. I remember the way the light caught the edge of his face, carving a shadow down his cheek. His hair was longer than I remembered. Messy, intentional. Need something? I asked, wiping my hands on the towel. I kept my voice even. He shook his head. He started, but didn't finish. That pause. It stayed between us like a fog. He stepped in, not close, but not far either. Just enough that I could feel the shift in air. The guest room was only 10 steps from where we stood. But suddenly, it felt like a whole other country. He looked at me. Not around me. Not past me. At me. And then he said it. Good night. Not like a boy. Not like a guest. Like someone saying goodbye to the last rule still standing. I don't know how long I stood there after he walked away. The sound of his door closing was the only punctuation in the house. My hands were still wet. The sponge had fallen to the floor. I hadn't noticed. It was the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't want to admit. Like he saw it already written. I didn't sleep that night. Every time the wind moved outside, I thought I heard his voice. Every shadow on the wall became a reminder of the moment I hadn't known how to answer. Because deep down I had. And that's where it began. Not in anything he did, but in the part of me that noticed. That felt the edge of the word goodnight like a blade pressed gently to the skin. And for the first time in years, I wasn't cold. I was burning. I didn't speak to him the next morning. I couldn't. Not out of shame, exactly, more like a strange paralysis. A half-waking state where I felt like a version of myself I didn't quite trust. There's a peculiar kind of fear that comes not from danger, but from recognition. I saw something in myself I hadn't dared to acknowledge, and I was terrified of how much it resembled longing. He was already in the kitchen when I came down, making coffee. The house smelled like cinnamon and burnt toast. That familiar domestic scent that should have grounded me. But nothing felt stable anymore. He turned, offered me a mug without comment. "Sleep okay?" I lied. "Fine." He didn't press. Just nodded and went to sit by the window, barefoot, reading something on his phone like nothing in the world had shifted. But I had. I wasn't watching him, not with my eyes, but something inside me was. Clocking the way his legs stretched out, the slope of his neck as he tilted his head to read, the rise and fall of his chest. Slow, steady, unaware, or pretending to be. The day passed in fragments. Charles left early for a client meeting. Said he might be gone overnight. Some wine auction event with old friends. He kissed my cheek before leaving, and I nearly flinched from the softness of it. I wasn't ready for tenderness. Not when my insides were so sharp. Michael helped me in the garden that morning. Not a word about the night before. Not a look that lingered. And yet I couldn't breathe right. He raked leaves while I trimmed dead branches. We worked in silence, the sun catching on the fine sweat at the back of his neck. I noticed how he'd outgrown the memory I held of him. He wasn't that silent teenager anymore. He moved differently. Carried weight in his shoulders, a quiet power in the way he turned to look when I said his name. "Can you hold this?" I asked, passing him a small pot. His fingers brushed mine. Just slightly. I dropped it. It hit the grass with a muted thud. He bent down to retrieve it, his eyes catching mine on the way up. Neither of us said a word. I didn't need him to speak. I could already hear it in the silence. That night was still between us. Like smoke. You can't catch it, but you know it's there because it's choking you. Lunch was quiet. He made a sandwich. Ate it standing by the counter. I made soup and let it go cold. We moved around each other carefully, like the house had become too narrow. "I'm heading into town later," I said. "Need anything?" He shook his head. "I'm good." And then, softer, "Thanks." I looked at him too long. I felt it. I saw him realize it too. I turned away first. That evening, I sat on the back porch as the sun slipped down. One of those late spring dusks that tastes like oranges and old dreams. I had a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, just holding. I didn't want to feel the heat. I already felt too much. I didn't hear him come out. But I felt it, the presence. He sat on the step below mine. Not beside me. Not close. Just near enough that I could hear the shift of his breathing. We didn't speak for minutes. Long, stretched out ones that made the air feel like molasses. Then he said, "You ever wish things were different?" My throat tightened. "Different how?" He shrugged. "Just not like this." I didn't know what to say. Everything in my chest pulled tight. I thought of answers that would have been safe. About career paths, family arrangements, politics. But none of them were true. So I didn't answer at all. He nodded, like he understood that silence too. When he stood, I stayed seated. He didn't look back. But he left something behind. Not a word, not a gesture. Just the unmistakable sense that something had begun and neither of us knew how to stop it. That night, I didn't sleep again. I lay in bed, covers pulled to my chin, the sound of the ceiling fan slicing the dark. Charles hadn't called. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself I preferred the quiet. But that was a lie. I was waiting for a different noise. At some point, I got up. Wandered to the kitchen. No real reason. Just restlessness dressed as thirst. He was there, sitting at the table in the half-dark, a mug of something in his hands. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just nodded. Couldn't sleep? No. He gestured to the other chair. I sat. For a while, we just listened to the fridge hum. Then he said, I remember when I was 15, you made me hot chocolate. You don't even remember, do you? I blinked. No. He smiled, a small twist of mouth. I had a bad dream. I didn't say anything, just came downstairs. You were watching some movie, half asleep on the couch. You saw me, got up, and made it without asking what was wrong. You were the only person who didn't try to fix me. That word, fix, it hit deeper than I wanted. I looked at my hands. I didn't recognize them anymore. Not in this light. I'm not who I used to be, I whispered. I know, he said. Neither am I. And then that pause. The one that opens doors or leaves them forever closed. He didn't touch me. He didn't move. But I felt it. The ask. The ache. The shift. Good night, he said again. And this time, it felt like an answer to a question I hadn't dared ask. During the day, I was still Elaine. Still the wife. Still the woman who folded towels in threes, who clipped coupons from the mail, who refilled the bird feeder in the backyard. I woke when Charles stirred, brewed the coffee, asked about his meetings. I nodded at the right moments, wore soft tones, touched his arm when I passed him. To anyone watching, I was the same. But inside, I was full of static. Michael's presence had become an atmosphere, not just a person. He was the sound of bare feet on hardwood, the slight scrape of a chair against the kitchen tile, the shift in the air when he passed too near. He never touched me, never crossed a line. But I had already redrawn the lines in my head, and they moved every time he looked at me too long. Charles didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to see. People don't always want the truth. Sometimes, the performance of marriage is more comforting than the rawness of honesty. Michael stayed quiet. Still the guest, still the part-time son. But something about him was deliberate now. He lingered in the same room longer than necessary. He asked if I needed help with groceries. He stood too close when handing me a dish. Every time, I told myself I was imagining it. And every night, I lay in bed replaying the day, each glance, each pause, each wordless hum of possibility. It started to affect the small things. I wore perfume to cook dinner. Lip balm in the evenings, when I knew he'd be coming down for water. I shaved my legs on a Monday, a day I never bothered with before. It wasn't preparation. It was anticipation dressed as accident. The guilt didn't come the way I expected. It didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in as a dull throb, behind the eyes, in the jaw, at the base of the spine. Charles was kind, predictable. He'd done nothing wrong. That made it worse, because I was the one unraveling. The night everything shifted again, Charles was out late. A dinner meeting. I wasn't sure if he was with clients or old college friends. I didn't ask. Michael came in around 9. Hair damp from a shower. T-shirt, soft, worn. He poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. I was wiping the stove, already too aware of how close his voice was. He didn't speak, just drank slowly, watching the dark outside the window. And then he said my name. Not Elaine. Not hey. My name. Like it was unfamiliar and sacred at the same time. I turned. He didn't look away. There are moments in life that feel like the pause before thunder. Still. Electrified. Impossible to walk away from. I don't want to ruin anything, he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Then say it, he whispered. Say what? That you haven't thought about it. My mouth opened, then closed. He waited, and I said nothing, because it was already too late. After that night, we didn't speak of it again. But the silence changed. It wasn't a wall. It was a thread stretched taut. I avoided being alone with him. And I sought it out in the same breath. I lied to Charles about errands, about a lunch date with a friend who'd moved away. I told him I needed quiet when I was really sitting in the guest room after Michael had gone out, just to feel the echo he left behind. Michael was patient. He didn't push. But he looked at me like he knew what I was holding back and that I'd offer it anyway, eventually. I wanted to scream, to confess, to kiss him just to break the tension, to run, to disappear. Instead, I baked. I ironed shirts. I organized the hall closet. I lit candles at dinner and said I was nesting. Charles smiled like I was healing something inside myself. And I was, but not for him. The weekend at the cabin was Charles's idea. Just us, he said. No distractions. I almost laughed, because distractions were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Michael packed light. He always did. The drive up was quiet, save for the hum of the tires and Charles's small talk. He played a podcast I barely heard. At the cabin, I unpacked slowly, touched every drawer handle, ran my hands over the quilt, grounded myself in fabric and wood. The first night we played cards. Charles opened wine. Michael sat across from me, barefoot again. I noticed the shape of his ankles, the curve of his collarbone, the way he leaned forward when it was my turn to deal. When Charles fell asleep on the couch, mouth slightly open, the fire flickering low, I stood. Michael didn't. He watched me. Not with hunger. With gravity. I walked to the kitchen. I didn't look back. He didn't follow. But the weight of him did. I started waking early, just to see if he was in the living room first. He was. Every time. We didn't speak. We drank coffee. Sat in parallel silence. But in the way he handed me the mug, slow, deliberate, I heard every word we weren't allowed to say. The final night of the cabin stay, I found myself outside alone. Moonlight silvered the lake. My bare feet pressed against the wood of the dock. I heard the door open. His steps behind me. He stopped just close enough that I could feel the heat from his chest in the cold air. "If I asked you to walk away," he said, "would you?" "I already did. Every night." "Then why are you still standing here?" I closed my eyes. And I breathed. Because I knew what would happen if I turned around. And I knew that next time, I wouldn't. The drive home from the cabin was quiet. Not awkward, just subdued. Charles played music softly, something instrumental. The kind of background hum meant to fill silence without noticing it does. Michael sat in the back again, one leg tucked beneath him, staring out the window. I didn't look back at him. But I didn't need to. I could feel the space between us like breath, not touching, but undeniable. When we reached the house, Charles got out first, hauling bags. I followed. Michael came in last. He lingered by the car just long enough for me to notice. That evening, we pretended things were normal. Charles suggested takeout. Michael said he wasn't hungry. I said I had emails to catch up on, though I hadn't opened my laptop in days. The next morning, Michael was gone. No note. Just his coffee mug in the sink. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Days passed like fog. I moved through them efficiently. I smiled at Charles when he brought flowers. I answered questions. I asked about invoices. I made the bed every morning, perfectly tucked. But every time I passed the guest room, I paused. I never opened the door. I just let the weight of it press against my ribs. A week later, I found a message. Not from him. From myself. An old journal I hadn't opened in over a year. pressed between receipts and dried petals. Inside, one sentence. The body knows the truth even when the mind pretends. I had written it before any of this. Before the pause. Before the word that set my life in motion. Good night. I didn't see Michael for nearly 2 months. And then one afternoon, I did. It was accidental. A parking lot. A Saturday. I was coming out of the grocery store. He was leaning against his truck, arms folded, waiting for someone. He saw me. I froze. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. I didn't speak. Just nodded, almost imperceptibly. And that was it. Until later that night, when I found a letter. Slipped into the mailbox. No name. No return address. Just 3 words on the envelope. If you want. Inside. An address. A time. Nothing else. I didn't decide. Not then. I went to bed with the letter folded under my pillow. Charles reached for me that night. Gently. Thoughtfully. And I let him. But I kept my eyes closed the whole time. Not because of guilt. Because of the memory of a voice saying good night like a goodbye to safety. Because part of me had already left. Saturday came. I dressed slowly. Careful blouse. Soft scarf. Not seductive. Intentional. I didn't tell Charles the first was going. I said I needed a walk. I left my phone on the counter. The address led to a small house near the edge of town. Trees half bare. Wind speaking through the branches. He opened the door before I could knock. Neither of us said anything. He stepped aside. I entered. We didn't touch. Not at first. We sat across from each other like old friends who had shared too many secrets to start over. He poured tea. Not coffee. No sugar. The scent was soft like memory. You came, he said finally. I nodded. You asked. I said if. And I did. He looked at me for a long time. Not with expectation. With recognition. I'm not staying here, he said. I'm leaving next week. New job. New state. I swallowed. I figured. I didn't want to go without. He stopped. Without what? Closure? One last look? I didn't ask. I already knew. I set my mug down. He reached across the table, not for my hand. For my wrist. His thumb moved in slow, silent circles. We sat that way for minutes. Then, I don't want to be your shadow, he said. I closed my eyes. You never were, I whispered. You were the light that showed me I still existed. We didn't say goodbye when I left. There was no need. The door closed softly. I walked back slowly. The wind carried something clean. When I entered the house, Charles was chopping vegetables. He looked up, smiled. You okay? I smiled back. Yes. And it wasn't a lie. Weeks passed. Life resumed. But not as before. I was different. I bought new bed sheets. I planted herbs. I rearranged the furniture in the guest room. Not to erase him. To reclaim it. My body moved differently now. Not to seduce. To remember. Every time I passed the hallway, I heard it again. Good night. Not a closing. A beginning. A breath. A rebirth. And that is what I live with. Not what happened. But what almost did. And the woman it woke up inside me. The one who stands quietly now in her own house. Breathing. Still. Alive.